Alrighty, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to lesson number 23, and this one's going to be covering the topic of views. Not a hugely critical concept to understand within databases, but definitely useful if you are going to be actually pursuing any sort of a career which uses databases and SQL. So let's get to it. So here's what you're going to learn in this lesson. We're going to go ahead and talk about what a database view is, what it's used for, and how to sort of visualize what a view really is. I'm all about visualization techniques and using them to understand what it is that you're being taught. So I'm going to hopefully try to make it paint a picture for you to understand what a view really is. We're going to talk about the syntax, because it's always important to talk about syntax for how to create a view. And we're going to talk about how to quote-unquote execute a view. So you don't really execute a view, you use a view, but I like to use the word execute because it sounds very cool. It sounds like we're doing something, we're going forward with this, we're making use of this thing. So I'm going to talk about how to execute a view. And finally, I'm going to wrap up with some things to remember, some important things to understand when you are creating and using these views that you're going to create for yourself. So, first off, we're going to start, obviously, with what is a database view. So a view is a special kind of statement that's used to read data from your database. So views are all about reading data in sort of a useful and sort of a simplified way. But when you think about a view, think about reading data. So think about a view as kind of being like a table in a database. Okay, you can sort of think of it like being a table. This is the visual part of it. Think of it like a table, but it's not an actual physical table, so to speak. But it kind of functions a bit like a table because you can read from it. Okay, you can read data. You can select data. When I mean read, I mean select. You can select data from this, quote-unquote, imaginary table, this view, but you can't actually insert into it or delete data from it. Because like I said, it's not an actual physical table, so you can't insert or delete from it, but it's only about reading from it. So, views can be set up to read data across multiple tables as one simple select statement. Okay? So, views are all about simplifying the process of reading data. Okay? And one of its benefits is that it can look across multiple tables as one select statement, one easy, simplified select statement. Okay, so that means that if you had a particularly helpful query that had to do a bunch of joins across several tables, and this query had, a really complex where structure, such as where on a bunch of conditions, and there's a grouping condition, and it had a halving, and it had a bunch of aggregate functions, and there's some conditional parts to it, like an if statement, and it was a very complex query. You could take that entire query and you could simplify it into a single view. Okay? So views are especially helpful when creating reports about your data. So the reason why I bring that point up is because every time I've used reports in my professional career as a programmer, they always tend to use views. Okay? And the reason why they use views is really two reasons. One, reports tend to take data across all of the database. So they tend to hit a lot of different tables in order to display the data, because databases are all about normalization and breaking data apart into single tables. But reports are all about bringing all those different pieces of data, all those rows of data across all those tables and bringing them up and showing and being shown on one screen, on one report. So you can think of a report as being the opposite of normalization. A report is kind of denormalizing the data in order to look at it. And that's why views are especially helpful, because like I said, views can read data across multiple tables and simplify them into one easy to use, easy to remember select statement. Okay? And also the second reason why I mentioned the thing about reports is that views are also helpful when you want to hide columns, when you want to hide data from a particular table. Okay, or from a particular report, or from a particular user. You can actually have views that instead of, like, for example, if you want to select data from, let's say, some sort of a sensitive table. Let's say you had a database of all of your employees. Let's say you owned a company, and there's a table that had all the employees' information, their addresses, their salaries, their, who knows, maybe their number of absences, their number of, times gone to the doctor, and times that they were late, and it had all this sensitive information. but you wanted to hide that information from any old user going in and using the database. You could actually create a view that would only be able to see certain columns inside of that employee table. Okay, and then you create another view that actually used a more strict guideline, so it'd only be allowed to be run by certain users on the database that would be able to see all of the columns inside of that particular table. Okay, so I'm not going to get into the security part of it because that's not overly helpful for you guys right now where you are, but I'm definitely going to be talking about views and actually how to hide columns and how to have it join across multiple tables, etc., etc. So okay, let's go into it. Let's create a view. Hopefully you have somewhat of an idea of what a view is all about. Like I said, a view is all about reading data. So hopefully you understand that concept and we can move forward. So let's create a view. And remember that complex query that we created back in lesson number 19? It was the one that we used to calculate the account balances of all of our bank accounts. Okay, that was that query. It had a sum aggregate function, and then it had an if statement that checked the transaction type. If it was a debit transaction type, then it multiplied the amount by -1. Otherwise, it left it alone. And then it did. It had a group by on the bank account ID, so we used it to calculate the actual account balance across all of the bank account IDs. It was a complex query, and it was a helpful query. So let's take that useful query and let's turn that useful query into a view so we don't ever need to type that stuff in again. Because that was a big pain in the butt to have to go through and type in that sum and then if statements and multiplied by -1s and all that stuff and grouping. Let's only have to ever type that in once, and let's use that and simplify it into a view. So here's the generic syntax for creating a view. You say create view. You give it the name of the view that you want to give it to. So, I mean, the name of the view is typically, it follows the same rules as naming a table or naming a column. Okay, it's the same thing. Whatever name you like, you use underscores and try to keep it somewhat logical for the name of the view. Okay, then you say as, select, and then you put in your select statement. Okay, so in this case, you're saying the select statement is going to be an actual select statement. It's going to be an actual real select statement that you would use in the real world. So just like I was talking about the select sum and with the if statements and et cetera, you would put that select statement into this actual part right here at the bottom. Okay, that was what you would create the view around. So let's take a look at that. So that's simple enough. So let's take that generic construct and run with it. Let's turn our complex query into a view. Like so. So I'm actually going to add in one more keyword here. I'm going to say or replace. Create or replace. This is kind of like the if exists when you're creating a table, and I'll get into that in just a moment. Just forget about that for now. We can say that it's just create view, like we saw before. So create view. I'm going to call it account balances as, and then here's that complex select statement I was talking about. Select the sum. If the transaction type is D, multiply it by -1, the amount. Otherwise, leave the amount alone and store it as a total. And also grab the bank account ID from the transactions table. Group it by the bank account ID, and there you go. So there you go. That is the complex select statement that we just created before. We just put that into a view, and that view is called account balances. Now, I also put in create or replace. So like I said, notice that I made use of the or replace syntax to make it rerunnable. So the reason why I did this is because let's say you were to create the view account balances, and you did this, but then maybe later you would want to come back and alter this view. Maybe you also want to have the bank account number being shown. So not just the bank account ID, but the bank account number. So that's what the customers would see when they log into their actual bank account. So right now it doesn't have that, so we need to add it. So we need to say, okay, comma, bank account number from transactions, but then the bank account number exists on the bank account table. So we need to do a join to bank account table on, transactions.bank account ID equals blah, blah, blah. And then we have to make reference to the bank account number from the bank account table. In any case, don't worry about all that complex stuff there. The point that I'm getting at is we would need to change our view. So if we just change our view and then said create view as, or create view account balances as, and then we updated it, it would give me an error and say, hey, that view already exists. You can't create it again. So that's why we use the create or replace. So that way, if it detects that account balances already exists, it's just going to replace it with the new select statement that you've put below. Or if you didn't even change the select statement, it'll just replace it with the same one again, and nothing changes, and everything is still hunky-dory. So that's just a good way to, it's just a good practice to get into to actually create it with the create or replace to make your life a lot easier. So you don't have to go and drop it manually afterwards. So if you didn't use the or replace, you'd have to say, drop view account balances, run that code, and then say create view account balances, and then run it again, right? Okay. So let's now learn how to use our new view. I called this how to execute the view. Execute being in air quotations. So now that we've created the view, how do we actually use this view? It's simple. We just run a simple select statement and refer to the name of the new view. Like so, we say select star from account balances. How simple is that? Select star from account balances. And anybody can remember that. But what's really happening behind the scenes is this will execute that complex select statement that we outlined in the view's definition. When I say the view's definition, I'm referring to this right here, the create or replace view, etc., that we just talked about 2 seconds ago. This is the view's definition. We're defining what the view is all about. Okay, going back forward again. This will execute that complex select statement that we outlined in the view's definition. So the simple select statement above, which is right here, select star from account balances, is kind of like running this select statement, which is right here, which is the complex select statement that we just outlined in the view's definition, which is the sum if the transaction type is equal to D, etc., etc. Anyway, I was just talking about this. So this is what it's going to be running when we say select star from account balances. Okay. How cool is that? So we've essentially taken all of this complex stuff and we've hidden it inside of something that we call a view, which makes our lives a lot easier for actually running this particular select statement. Okay? Now, let me go back. Sorry, I don't want to go forward just yet. I want to talk about the data hiding portion. So think about it this way. When you say select star from account balances, when you say select star, the star represents all of the fields that you have in your select statement within the view's definition. So what do I have in terms of columns in the view's definition? Well, we have this first one called total, which is the sum of the transactions, etc., etc. And then we have bank account ID. So there's 2 different columns. And that's it. So if we say select star from account balances, star really means just these 2 columns. If we added a third one, then select star would mean all 3 of those columns. So what you can do is you can take this concept and you can run with it. Perhaps we want to create a view that hides some of the columns on the transactions table. Like let's say we want to create a view that has all of the columns for the transactions table except for the transaction ID. Okay, maybe that's useful for someone in some way, shape, or form. Who knows? So what we would do is we would create a view, and we would say, well, let me go back, and we'd say create or replace view, and then we had to name it something different from transactions. So maybe we would do view underscore transactions. Okay. Sometimes the convention is to append the word, or rather prepend the word view, so that you know that you're actually using a view. That's something that I omitted here that I probably should not have omitted. So really, this should have been called view underscore account underscore balances. In any case, we can create or replace the view called view underscore transactions. We would say as, and we would say select. And then we would list out every single column for the transactions table that we would want this view to see. And we would omit the transactions ID column because we don't want that one to be shown. So it'd probably say select, transaction type, what else? Transaction details, amount, and bank account ID. I think those were the columns that exist inside of that table. And then we'd say from transactions, and that would be it. So now we would have a view that when you say select star from that view, the view transactions, when you do that, it would omit the transaction ID column. So that's how you would hide columns from the users. Okay? So to sum up some things that you need to note about views before you use them. The view definition is what you call frozen at the time of creation. So any changes to the underlying tables after the view has been created will not affect the definition of the view, will not affect the view definition whatsoever. So what I mean by that is, for example, if a view is defined as select star on a table. So if I said create or replace view transactions as select star from transaction. So now I'm creating the view as just being a complete duplicate of the transactions table because I'm saying select star from that transactions table. Then any new columns that we've added to that transactions table later do not become a part of that view. Okay, so what that means is if I created the view called view transactions as select star from transactions, and then I went ahead and added a new column to the actual transactions table. So if I added, transaction detail summary or something like that column to the transactions table, that new column, the transactions details summary column, would not appear inside of the view transactions view that I just created. Okay, because it's frozen at the time of creation. The view itself will go in and see whatever columns there are at the time of the creation of the view, and it will store that in its memory and run with it. Okay, so that's one important thing to remember. Another important thing to remember about views is that the select statement within a view, within the view's definition, cannot contain a subquery. So that means that the select statement within the view's definition, which is when I said, create or replace view, view transaction as, and then I said select whatever, that is the select statement that this is referring to. That select statement within that view's definition cannot contain a subquery. But what's a subquery, you ask? Because we haven't talked about that yet. And that's a great question, and that's what we're going to learn about in the next lesson. So it's a great segue into, lesson 23 now we're going into, which is going to be all about subqueries. So, just to sum up, what you've learned today is you've learned what a view is. A view is used to read data sometimes across multiple tables. It's all about condensing a complex query into a simple select statement, into a simple view. A view is you can kind of think of it as a database table, so to speak. Okay, it kind of functions like a database table in terms of being able to read data from it, but you cannot insert or delete from a view because a view is just what it sounds like. It's just a view of the data. It doesn't allow you to interact with the data. If you wanted to actually insert or delete data from a view, you'd actually have to go into the actual tables and modify the tables that are underlying the view itself. All right. And let's see, what else do we talk about? And then we talked about the syntax behind how to create it. And if you need a refresher on that, you can just go back through this video, rewind, and watch it again. All right? So, very, very good stuff. Can't wait to see you in the next lesson, which is going to be about subqueries. Bye for now.